Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. It's good to have you again on this Tuesday. Tuesday evening, man. I tell you, seems like the weather has finally broken, and I am glad for that. It's good to have you guys. As you're coming in, let us know where you are hailing from, where you are joining us from, I should say. Where are you joining us from? We want to know. We have developed a nice family over the last, several months, and we want to get to know you tonight. Omaha, Nebraska. Others of you are coming in. Yes, from Maryland, from London. Yes, just let us know where you are joining us from. Over the last several weeks, we've been tackling some interesting topics. It just so happened that we began our conversations in this Clear Conversations community with the breaking of the Charlie Kirk murder. And so that kind of captivated the subject matter for a couple of weeks. Then we transitioned into a look at the importance of hermeneutics. And we had some great facilitators. Craig Newborn, formerly the pastor of the Oakwood University Church. And then we had Jason, the Christ supremacist. Yes, the volume went up substantially when he came in as our presenter. And we had a good time with Jay. Jason's been on about 3 or 4 times. And always engaging. And we were glad that he was with us. So again, it's good to have you. Darren, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. I'm glad to see we got 33 people in here. We have a new link. So some of you guys, thankfully, you follow the instructions, you open your emails. We like that you made your calling election sure, at least for tonight. We know some people are trying to find the link because we have a new one. So hopefully they will be here. But I'm excited for this conversation.
Just remember one thing, ladies and gentlemen, it's Darian's fault. No matter what happens, it's not me. Just blame it
I'll
on
take it. I'll be that.
blame it on the tech. No, we're going to try to do some communication, and because there were a number of people who registered, and of course, if they aren't able to join us live, we will make the recording available as we always do.
Yep.
So
I'm going to put
again,
that link for the Clear Conversations community in the chat. Most of you already know the deal. We have the session with Dr. Burton, with Claudia Allen. Everybody can be in that. You guys can put your questions in the chat. We'll have maybe a couple of minutes at the end for me to field those to the panelists. We want our exclusive space near the top of the hour to be for our Clear Conversations community members, where you can unmute, you can ask your questions directly, or you can have me do it. But that's the intimate space you want to have. Doc, we're still trying to get the communities themselves active. That's still something we're asking for, the Facebook group, the main community, so we can keep these conversations going. But I'll put a link in the chat so that if you want to be in the space, you know exactly where to be. Let me go and do that now.
That's it. We are happy tonight that we've kicked off Black History Month. And boy, I tell you, what a topic. Many of you know that the Sabbath School Quarterly, if you are an Adventist, you're familiar with it. The Sabbath School Quarterly has an interesting cover. And interesting is a euphemism that I'm using. It's an interesting cover. And it has created quite the buzz. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, Keith. Incidentally, we're going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, but I'm just going to talk about one of them right now, Keith Burton, who used to be a part of our faculty, who left us high and dry. And so as the faculty was carefully crafting a statement to respond to this cover, I looked to my right and my left, and
Mercy.
all of them. No, I'm just joking. Everybody was engaged, but there's something about that Keith Burton. So we missed him. But the faculty of Oakwood University's theology religion department is going to make a statement about that cover shortly, and you will be able to see it and respond to it. And tonight we are glad that we have two of our friends with us. We are going to ask them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Claudia Allen. What are you doing? Who are you
Hello.
for those who don't know?
Hello. It's such a pleasure to be back. Man, I hear a little bit of an echo. But my name is Claudia Allen. I have the distinct privilege of serving as the Assistant Director of the Anne Arundel County Office of Equity and Human Rights in Annapolis, Maryland, as a day job. And I also serve as the Executive Director of Adventist Peace Fellowship. And
Love it.
so I am excited to be here and to engage in this conversation with you guys.
I love it. Love it. Dr. Burton, introduce yourself, please, sir.
Yes, Keith Burton. I serve as the Director for Graduate Programs in Spiritual Care at Advent Health University. I like to say I'm a missionary to Advent Health because I also still have a leg in at Oakwood, where I teach a couple of classes
Yeah.
in the graduate program. But it's always a blessing to be here with my partner in hope, Dr. Jesse Wilson.
Yes, sir. Always good to have you. Thank you guys for joining us. As Darian said, this conversation is sponsored, as were the others, by the Clear Conversations community. It's just a safe space for us to have honest conversations. We want you to feel free to engage us in the chat. It's not a meeting, it's a webinar. So please put your questions in the chat. And we want you to join the Clear Conversations community if you feel so led. We have a great time. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now, the conversation tonight is not a debate. It's not an attack on your spirituality or your faith necessarily. It's a thoughtful, historical, theological conversation about how we picture Jesus. That's important.
Mhm.
How we picture Jesus.
Mhm.
Now, for many of us, the image of Jesus that we grew up with felt normal. It felt comforting. For some people, it almost felt sacred.
Mm.
But tonight we're going to explore whether or not the familiar is always faithful. Did you hear what I just said?
Mm.
We want to determine if the familiar. I'm going to
It's
quote
faithful.
myself. I tell
No,
you,
you should. It was good.
we want to determine if
Hmm.
the familiar is always faithful. And so
Mhm.
we want to get it started. Dr. Burton, I believe that you're going to start us out. I made you the co-host so that you can share your screen, sir.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share
Right
my
ahead.
screen, Dr. Wilson, and just going to share something real quick. We're looking at what covers Jesus. Very briefly, going to look at geography, art, anthropology, and ancient DNA.
Hmm.
Is this a big deal? Yes, it is a big deal because of the dominant images of Jesus in the West. And what I'm going to take a look at as a researcher is it evidence-based or mythic propaganda? So again, looking at geographical location, artistic depictions, anthropological reconstruction, and genetic assumptions. This is the Cliff Notes version. So when it comes to geographical location, we find evidence, because again, it's evidence-based, we find evidence in proximity. And so when we look at this whole concept of Africa, and you can see I quoted myself down here, actually, my book, The Blessing of Africa, the Bible in African Christianity, on which I go beyond the colonial categories where you look at Africa and conquest and the Suez Canal kind of cutting off the main continent from the rest of the Middle East, and look at what we read in Genesis chapter 10 in the areas where Ham's descendants settled. And if we look at those areas geographically and look at the modern parallels, Misraim, Egypt is pretty much all of North Africa, Kush, Ethiopia, Northeast Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, even gone up to Iraq. And then Canaan is the Middle East, what we today we call the Middle East, Syria, Palestine, etc. And Put or Punt would be sub-Saharan Africa. So the inference there, again, looking at evidence, is that Africa forms the backdrop of the biblical story. I like to say from the book of Genesis to the middle of Acts, all of the Bible is set in biblical Africa. Artistic depictions. Many of us are used to depictions of the Roman Jesus. And this is an old picture from even before Leonardo da Vinci, actually. But we also see that Egypt has its own depictions, as well as Ethiopia. Many of the Ethiopian depictions are much older than the ones that we find in Europe. However, back in 2018, there was an interesting find in the Negev. And of course, the Negev is in the desert, this one of the southern deserts of Israel. And it's the Shivdev discovery by Dr. Ellen Fana Fener. And again, 2018, found in a Byzantine church from about the 5th or 6th century. And if you look at this image over here, which many believe is the oldest pictorial depiction of Jesus, now it's dated to the 5th and 6th century. And some may say, well, that's way after him. But yes, remember, but it's in a region where he lived. And if you look at this, we see a male face. We don't see any flowing strands in the hair, but what we do see is dense curled outward projecting hair, which suggests some type of afro. So what's the inference here? And again, these are just inferences because we don't know for sure if this is exactly how he looked, but we do know if this is how he was depicted in this church. So the inference here is that centuries after Jesus' ministry, people in the area where he lived still depicted him with woolly hair. Now, finally, third, cultural anthropology. The use of forensic facial recognition evidence. Popular Mechanics was the first to publish something that was reported on very briefly in National Geographic in 2002. Forensic anthropologist Richard Neve, using the methods of the reconstruction, anthropological reconstruction, looked at first century male skulls from Galilee. So this is the region where Jesus looked, had 3 skulls. He used what you call computer tomography scanning, where they put little pins different places and have ways to check the density, look at tissue depth masters, also did composite averaging. And that's to take all the 3 of those skulls, put them together, face blending. And what they see here, the picture over here, is a typical first century Galilean male, which has distinct phenotypical features. And of course, as we look, we see again, the hair is more curly. We look at the depth of the lips, etc. And this, again, is from a cultural anthropological reconstructive perspective, how people around Jesus's time may have looked, and Jesus may have had this appearance. But finally, from a genetic perspective, the genetic assumptions, we look at the DNA evidence. And again, there have been a number of samples taken from the first century, at least what scientists believe, first century tombs, etc., in Palestine, Israel, and Jordan. And the evidence that we find for major haplogroups. We have J1, J2, EM123, and EM78. J1 is found there, but even before it got there, it's also found in Ethiopia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Oman. J2, and you see I've lighted out over there because that's found in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. So that's kind of an outline. We look at the others. EM123 is found in Egypt, Sudan, and Somalia, as is EM78. Now, here's the significance. The parent of EM123 and EM78 is EM2, otherwise known as E1B1A, which is a parent DNA. Where do we find that? 80% of that DNA we find in sub-Saharan Africa amongst the Nigerian subgroups like Yoruba, Igbo, etc., and also Ghana, the Akan, the Dagomba, etc. So what is the inference? The inference is that DNA for males in a region where Jesus was has genetic markers that evidence kinship in West Africa. And of course, I have the source down here. So very briefly, we could have spoken about this for a lot longer than just a couple of seconds to tell the truth. But just very briefly, that's how I would like to start our conversation, by not necessarily dealing with what folk may feel, sentimentalism. Sure. What is the scientific evidence? We have some scientific evidence.
I love it. I love it. Listen, let's do this. Great introduction. I can see that even though we have, 78, 80 people on, there are easily that many more who are blowing my phone up and we're trying to get the link to them. And so, Claudia, why don't you reflect on what you just saw?
Oh, man. So I really appreciate that, Dr. Burton, you've really kind of laid out just the geographical, the regional, and the genetic makeup of the historical Jesus. Because I think that sometimes when we have this conversation about the racialization of Jesus, this does in fact take place significantly over time. And I think that when I had the privilege of studying with Dr. Edward J. Bloom, he wrote the book, The Color of Christ. Of course, he has it on display, the great, the one and only. I think the thing that was most fascinating to me, which you even got into a little bit in your book, is I feel like to study the racialization of Christ is to study art history. And I think that part of this conversation is, what is humanity's fascination with creating or depicting God in their own image? And I think that we see humanity creating and depicting God in their own image for millennia. And I think that the conversation shifts, I think, around the 20th century, when white supremacists, particularly the American theological imagination, begins to use these depictions for the purpose of power and the maintenance of racial hierarchy. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Burton, because I feel like humanity has been racializing Christ for forever, right? So we've got these Greco-Roman depictions of Jesus. We have ancient Asian, East Asian depictions of Jesus. We have African depictions of Jesus. We have European depictions of Jesus, right? But it's really not until we get to the Warner Salmon head of Christ in 1941, with all 14 million copies or prints of that painting, kind of distributed, that we really kind of begin to have, I think, a more serious situation, where we've got basically depictions of Christ that are being used, they're being weaponized for the purpose of inflicting some kind of psychological terror, some kind of theological intimidation, and even utilized legally as a means of trying to keep Black and brown people in a particular racial hierarchy, so that now we're in this position where we say, hey, I don't like the white Jesus, right? Or we as Black people have these strong feelings, or I'll speak for myself. I have strong feelings when I see my church put images of a white Christ on all of our Sabbath school lessons, Bibles, Ellen White reprints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because there is basically no willingness or openness to a diversification of religious art, but rather it seems as though they are playing into the perpetuation of a white Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely, Claudia. And as we look at it, though, I do think that even though we do have the appropriation of Jesus in the different cultures you mentioned, I've seen Indian Jesuses, Chinese
Yeah.
Jesus, etc., we can look at a way of trying to move to more accuracy, not for the purpose of worshiping the image in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
but for the purpose of really recapturing the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I think it can be said with a certain degree of certainty that he didn't look like he was from Hong Kong, that he didn't look like he was from Scandinavia, or
Totally.
didn't look like, so we can say it with a certain degree of certainty. So
Yeah.
even though I fully understand why some people would want to create an image to which they can relate,
Yeah.
I do think that there is some validity to at least trying to recreate. All right. But again, even with recreating, we understand that we base things on hypotheses, right? On the hypotheticals. And so even what I've done, I've shown how the evidence leads,
Yeah.
and we have to draw conclusions, but I can't say with certainty this is how he looked, right?
Yeah.
Now, I do know when we look at the power of the image of the white Jesus, it even seeps into ways in which people depict the Black Jesus. If you think about the Black Jesuses that you often see, many of them are the Jerry curled Jesuses,
Yeah.
right?
Jerry curl
And
Jesus or locked Jesus.
or the locked Jesus.
Yeah.
And why is it Jerry curled and why is it locked? Because it resembles the long hair of Leonardo da Vinci's cousin. All right. And so I think we have to look at those things too,
Yeah.
even as we claim to be reclaiming, we claim to be deconstructing, but
Yeah.
sometimes we're just putting blackface on a white
Mm.
image, right?
Yeah.
So now, in looking at this whole white Jesus thing, I remember when I became highly aware of how much I was impacted by this picture of white Jesus, image of white Jesus. It was in my final year at Oakwood back in 1987. Dr. Richard Lovelace, who was the president at the time of Atlantic Union College, came down and he was doing some weird stuff, having us meditating the whole nine. And he told us to picture Jesus knocking at the door from Revelation chapter 3. And during the meditation, I almost went into Zen until I said, wait a minute, this dude's white, and I just had to push back on my eyes and I lost it after that, man. Because I'm like, I'm sitting down here trying to get to a point of peace.
Yeah.
And I've got the KKK knocking on my door, and it didn't, and so that kind of raised my awareness to a level. And it wasn't that I wasn't aware before, but I wasn't aware of how much my mind had been impacted, that when it was my own thoughts, my own imagination, I couldn't get the Scandinavian out of my view, And so
agreed.
So when I was asked to write the Sabbath School Quarterly, in 2014, I knew I was writing on Jesus, Christ and the Lord, etc. And I spoke to the editor and I wrote, and I said, listen, I know we're doing something on Jesus. I would prefer that we don't have any image of Jesus on the Sabbath School Quarterly. I said, just no image. I didn't ask for a black image.
Okay.
I said, no image. Well, I mean, to cut a long story short, I think a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Lord.
I mean, and guess what? And my name's on it.
All right. It is.
Okay.
Your name is on it, Doc.
I'm like, people, you don't know how I felt. Now, of course, there's this thing of, okay, do I say to them, you can't print it? But I'm like, no, I ain't gonna say that. And I think I was compromising there, what I'm saying? Because the content, but again, the fact that they were so tone deaf. And if you notice the cover that I used going in, we had the Sabbath School Quarterly, and the one next to that was Zeus. I mean, the same thing, the hand up, hand down. I'm sure most of us seen that picture before, man. I mean, come on. Don't tell me they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But I think that's why I struggle with, I definitely agree with you that I think that there's a validity to the project of trying to recreate and retrace and get as close as we can to a historical Christ. But I just feel as though humanity has never been interested in the historical project. I feel like what we've seen is humanity's need to see themselves in the body of Jesus and therefore recreate bodies that look like themselves and calling it Jesus. Yeah. And I wonder, I think that there's something that kind of needs to be teased out there spiritually. I often think about the first commandment, don't make any graven images, is there really some validity to the fact that maybe we really shouldn't have even been trying to nail the likeness in some capacity, right? Because I think ultimately, theologically, historically, cognitively, I think we can all agree with you that there is a historical Jesus and that he looked a particular way. And, idealistically, we all can see ourselves in that body. But I just feel like the reality of the imperial European world that we live in, I just don't see that practice.
To me, the problem is as problematic as it is for us to try to envision who Jesus is. I think one of the issues is that Christianity claims to be rooted in history. Christianity claims to be rooted in history, and if we're careless about the ethnicity of Jesus, we signal that accuracy really doesn't matter. I'm not saying that we're going to nail 100% accuracy how Jesus Christ looked, but I think it's a serious pursuit, and I think it's consistent with our claims about the historicity of Christianity. So yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like only some. Sorry, I only feel like I don't. Let me rephrase. I don't think American Christianity claims the historicity of Christianity. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't think American Christianity cares anything about historical Christianity in any capacity. Like it's fully committed to the construction of its own idea, its own fictional manifestation for its own purposes.
Yeah, I agree. Except that we're in America and we're Christians. And I got a classroom full of students that I want to take and I'm not saying that you're not taking this serious. I know exactly what you mean, but you get my point. It's attention. It's attention.
Yeah. So I'm reflecting on your argument for that, and I do understand it fully.
When he starts a phrase like that, I'm reflecting on your.
But is it possible that there could be a level of monophysitism in there? And what I mean by that, this whole thing of the whole blended nature in a sense, because yes, there's the divinity, but there's also the humanity, right? Yeah. And I think one of the challenges that one has sometimes in looking at the recreation of the historical Jesus is to basically say, well, if we do historically reconstruct how he may have looked, then that could be creating an idol in a sense, right? But how I see it is basically just looking at, okay, how did folk look back then? You know, right. And if he was there, how may he have looked? Yeah. And so I do think that there is a danger of people taking an image and turning it into an idol. As I'm looking at the whole thing of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, right? You know, Albert Cleage and others, right? Yeah. And so this whole thing was like, you know, we want a black Jesus, we want to worship a black Jesus sort of thing. And I think creating a black Jesus just for the purpose of worshiping the image is just as bad as worshiping the white image, okay? Because ultimately our worship goes straight through to the invisible one, the one who we cannot see. Yeah. But we are looking at the tangible fact that the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And historically, how did the word that became flesh dwell among us? How did he look, etc.? And it's not necessarily going into this so that we can say, okay, let's make an image to him. You know, remember on the Mount of Transfiguration, they wanted to kind of make these things so that they could have a shrine for, you know, Elijah and that, you know. So it's not about that. It's just going for some sort of historical accuracy, particularly in this age when white Jesus is the image of white Jesus, is the main god and tool and mallet and demon, yes, I said it, of white supremacy.
Totally agree.
Because it's being used to control, it's being used to fear, it's been, you know, and so what's interesting sometimes in my presentations, when I do evangelism, etc., right? Sometimes it's the first time folk are actually seeing a black Jesus. Absolutely. You know, so I was in one place where someone actually asked me, listen, I was in, it was Jamaica. Right. So I was in Jamaica doing a meeting in Jamaica, and someone after the meeting came and said, I noticed you use a lot of all your pictures of Jesus are black, right?
Praise God.
And then he said to me, are you racist?
Mercy.
And I'm like, what in the what? In the what? I just finished preaching, so I did literally say what in the what in the what. I didn't say anything else, right?
Yeah.
But I felt like saying something because I'm like, my goodness. Because
if you had used all white Jesus, he wouldn't have said nothing to you.
Would not have said a word. Would not have said a word. But then he went on to say something I've heard many times before. Well, who really cares what color he is? Right?
Yeah.
And you hear that all the time, man. I'm like, what do you mean? Who really cares color? So if I portray him as white, it's not really an issue, but I portray him as black, then color is not an issue. It is an issue.
Yeah.
And I was looking for my Naeem Akbar there, changing the images of psychological slavery. Because we have all been somehow trapped by this image and don't understand the impact that these icons have on not only our own psychology, but on the formation of our children.
We're
going to these Sabbath schools and are being shown a country club heaven where no blacks are allowed.
Yeah. The problem is kids seem to absorb theology visually before they do it cognitively.
Mm,
That
that's
is
good.
the issue
Yeah,
for me. I can understand a person
that's
arguing
very
what
true.
difference does it make
Wow.
theologically. I mean, in terms of your salvation, I put that aside. I park
Yeah.
that. But I know for a fact that kids will look at images and they process images in a way that are amazing to me.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that's why, for me, like I love the shift that kind of takes place, particularly during the Harlem Renaissance, when we
Mhm.
begin to get the racialization of Christ or the blackification of Christ. I
Mhm.
think that's when we really begin to get, County Cullen's poem, The Black Christ. Really begin to get Black authors likening Christ not just anatomically to the Black man, but likening his lived experience to that
Yeah,
of the Black
yeah,
man
yeah,
and
yeah,
connecting it
yeah.
particularly to lynching and the Jim Crow South. And so I think that particularly when we're talking about the racialization of Jesus in Black communities, it's more than just a color conversation for
It
us.
is.
When we make Jesus Black, it's
Absolutely.
less about the
Yeah,
locks and the Jerry
yeah.
curl and more about his lived experience as being likened to that of a Black man in the US.
Yeah, I mean, it
Right,
shows
right.
that he was colonized, he was
Mhm.
racialized.
Mhm.
I mean, so the challenge that I think some people totally underestimate, especially if they don't have much experience in urban areas, is the challenges that you have with Pan Africans
Mm,
and Afrocentrists and different groups who have weaponized this white Jesus argument against the Christian, various Christian fellowships, certainly Adventist Church.
mhm,
And I think we need to take it way more seriously than we do.
mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was actually going to look back there again to get James Cone's Crossing the Lynching Tree,
Yes,
and
Elder. Yes.
yeah, because
You
man,
pull, you're
listen.
Yeah.
pulling some powerful books from the back, Elder. You're pulling some powerful books.
We must. We must.
We
We
must.
we need the
Yeah.
Clear Conversations community to have the appropriate library.
Yes,
Yes, man.
yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
I
Because
agree. I
because
agree.
for me, it is, James Cone, I think, is one of the most powerful figures of the 20th century and the 21st century,
Yeah.
particularly as he develops his Black theology on Black power and his Black theology of liberation, in which he refers to, now, of course, he's not looking at Jesus, of course, and he does sort of the monophysite thing there too, right? And he says,
Yeah.
God is Black or Jesus is Black, etc.
Yes.
And he looks at that. But then something he does that a lot of people don't often talk about, he invites whites into Blackness.
Yes.
Cohen does that. He says,
Preach, Doc.
y'all need to become Black. All right. And I think more so what is needed now is a Black Jesus. I feel that if
Mm,
if our church, if our church wants to be relevant, if
mm,
our church really wants to reclaim the gospel, if our church wants to be
mm.
true to Jesus, for the next year, 2 years, even 5 years,
Hmm.
everything that comes out of GC should have a Black Jesus on it. I don't want to see anything where we go straight from doing a white Jesus and then go into, okay, this week is an Indian Jesus, Chinese Jesus. Da, da, da. And the reason why I say black Jesus, and I'm not against Chinese Jesus and Indian Jesus, it's
No,
because
no, no, no.
the truth is my presentations, have you seen my presentations now? Because there was one time when I was pre Mecca Malcolm,
Mm.
right?
Prima.
Where everything was black. Everything was black. Okay.
I feel you,
And
Elder.
then and then I thought about
Yeah.
people in the congregation who may be like put up and may not be hearing what I'm saying. So every
Yeah.
now and then I'm gonna throw in the Chinese Jesus and Indian Jesus. And yeah,
Totally.
you may see a white Jesus every now and then. It may flick up real quick subliminally.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But most of my depictions are indeed Black. But the reason why I say I think if the church is going to correct this, then
Hmm.
there needs to be a deliberate attempt to only do that for a while.
Hmm.
It's to get people used to seeing it. That, we get appeased all the time.
Yeah.
The government of this nation, yeah, black folk, we're gonna give you MLK Day.
Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna give you Juneteenth, and half the people like June what? Could tell the truth. Those people are listening. How many of y'all even knew about Juneteenth before Biden gave us a holiday? All right, and that's how we're
Especially not if they're not Black American, they don't.
Yeah.
Well, not even Black American. I mean, most Black Americans, if you ain't from Texas and Oklahoma and them places, most Black Americans I know had never heard of Juneteenth.
I don't know. I know a lot of Black Americans that know about Juneteenth, but I know a lot of immigrant Blacks had no idea.
Definitely don't know about Juneteenth.
Yeah,
Hey,
no clue.
for a number of people, it's a new development. Unfortunately,
It's
even
a new
in
development.
the South. Hey, let me say this.
But the point I was making, though,
go
Jesse,
ahead.
is that
Say again.
is that we can't be satisfied with little dog treats.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna appease you. We're gonna do this.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a little bit of syncopation at the next GC. We're gonna have a little track, but we're gonna turn it down to volume 2.
You see
You
what
trying to
happens?
upset
You see
me.
what happens? You give him an inch, and he's going back to that Malcolm. And listen, right before we're about at the we're not. Hey, we're flowing. Listen, I had my phone. If I'm surprised my phone didn't turn red, it has blown up. Totally blown up. There are over 100 of you in the chat, but there are probably a couple hundred who are mad at me right now because the link. I don't know what happened with that link. This is the first time we didn't have those. Listen, we didn't have that problem. I'm gonna get conspiratorial. We didn't have that problem when we dealt with Charlie Kirk, but when we dealt with Black Jesus.
Why when me and Dr. Burton come, the link don't work?
Conspiracy. But listen, we want you guys to know that about the top of the hour, because we got some great stuff that we're about to continue to get into. Make sure that you put your questions in the chat. The chat is popping. But we want to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible for about 10-15 minutes. Darian is going to lift questions directly from the chat for those of you who are a part of the Clear Conversations community. For a half hour after that, we'll have an open mic where you can be a part of the chat through the open mic. And if you're not a part of the Clear Conversations community, join. It's a great group. Go ahead, y'all. Pick it up. Anyone?
Go ahead, Claudia.
We were like, where were we? This is
Hey, let me frame it. Let me frame it a little bit. Okay, so. And then I'm going to frame it, and then we're going to do what we want to do. But the point is this: the name of the webinar is "What Color is Jesus? What difference does it make?" And so we've already been doing it, but let's continue to look at what difference it makes. We've looked at the fact that as Christians, we claim to be rooted in history. So the fact that we want to look at historical truth and biblical integrity, that's important. Both of y'all talked about the attempt to decolonize the gospel. A white Jesus is more than just an artistic choice. We're clear about that. But what are some other reasons that you all can think about as a springboard that it makes a difference?
Man, so I think some of the things that come to my mind as to why it makes a difference, when I think about white Jesus in particular, there was a very intentional effort to enshroud him in light, to use, blonde hair, blue eyes. And I think that this was very intentional because this is also part of kind of an Aryan ideology that's trying to purport white supremacy, right? And we have to be very clear, a certain kind of white supremacy, right? Because in America, not all white people were white always, right? So it's been a long history of when the Irish got to become white, when the Jews got to become white, when the Italians got to become white, the Germans, right? If I look back at Thomas Carlyle and many of these, earlier writers, they were coming up with pseudoscience for why the Germans were a subhuman race, why the Asians were a subhuman race, why the Italians were a subhuman race. Everybody was subhuman other than, Ralph Waldo Emerson's Englishmen, right? And so there has been this concerted effort for centuries around the construction of whiteness, the social invention that is whiteness. And I think the making Jesus white was kind of that final nail, pun intended, in that visual argument for Jesus as not just Jesus being holy, but they're trying to make whiteness holy. And in order to make whiteness holy, I've got to align holiness with these English traits, these particular Aryan characteristics. And by doing that, I am also simultaneously, contrastingly, demonizing anything that is not this Aryan depiction of holiness. So part of the reason why I think this conversation really does make a difference, people say, oh, Claudia, it doesn't matter. We can make Jesus whatever color we want. It doesn't make a difference. I think it does matter, because when we use these depictions of a white Jesus, we are in essence coming along with the notion of the holiness of whiteness. And we are also coming along with the demonization of blackness. And so how then do we say, and we are going to deconstruct the notion of blackness as unholy? In order to do that, we would have to embark on a kind of violent iconoclasm that James Cone talks about. It's just not possible to kindly just enter in Indonesian Jesus. It just doesn't. It just doesn't work. You have to do that kind of violent insertion that you were talking about a little bit earlier, Dr. Burton, of we are only using a black Christ, because that is the image that has been attached to Satanism, to the occult, to the demonic. So it's almost like we would have to redeem black skin, redeem black hair, redeem black features, black characteristics, in order to destroy the idol that is white Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, you said a whole lot there, Claudia. As we look at this whole notion of blackness, whiteness, etc., right? And in fact, probably the best book I've read on how to become white was Daniel Okrent's The Guarded Gate. Not sure if you read that one, but that's the beautiful, and that talks about the time in America where a whole bunch of folk weren't white. And one of the eugenicists for the Adventists on the audience, one of the most famous eugenicists of the early 20th century was John Harvey Kellogg. But that's what, and he has a whole section in the book about John Harvey Kellogg. Oh yeah. But listen, talking about the power of whiteness and what difference does it make? I'm looking at the reality that it's not just about white Jesus, but about how that white Jesus has been weaponized to the point where many of us are in these chains of slavery, mental slavery, that we don't even understand. That's why Marcus Garvey, when he was pushing his whole idea of the black God, etc., right? He was one who said the words that Bob Marley later memorialized in this redemption song, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. And I thought about this. I was presented at a conference in Kenya some years ago at the Hekima Institute, and I don't remember the gentleman's name. He's from Ghana, but teaches at Seton Hall University. And when he presented on the way in which images of Christ impact one's mind, he spoke about growing up in Ghana. He was a Presbyterian, and he says the saying was in his church that if you were on your way to church on a Sunday morning and you saw a white person, you could turn around and go home because you've just seen Jesus.
Yeesh.
I kid you not. When I heard that, I was like, whoa,
Mercy.
that's deep. And I thought about that. I've been to Ghana a couple of times. And I remember my first time going to Valley View University. And haven't been there in several years, but going there, one of the first things that hit me before you got in the gate, there was a huge mural of a white Jesus. And don't ask me if I preached about it that day, because I did.
Mercy.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. But again, how it impacts. So for instance, you'll go to some places on the continent And when it comes to worship, for instance, again, I think this is tied into the whole white Jesus thing. When it comes to worship, because the white Jesus comes with white culture, this whole notion of
Yes.
white supremacy. And
Yes.
so you'll go in the church in some places in Ghana, and the worship is higher than any Anglican church I've been to.
Person.
But then when the folk leave, then they're going to start drumming and dancing outside, right?
Yeah.
Because as far as they were taught, you can't do that in the church.
Yeah.
White Jesus don't like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this whole thing of Jesus being used as a very effective weapon to ingrain this notion of white supremacy. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, we look at the growth in the Adventist church, most of them on the African continent. And I think that's a good thing. But unfortunately, the effectiveness of Adventist missions a whole lot has been presenting an image of Jesus that is not based in the gospel.
Yeah.
That again is based in Europe, European supremacy, the degrading of other people's culture, given the folk who put the church manual together the gall to say that refined people will abstain from listening to jazz. Now, it's still in the church manual. Come on, people. This is 2026. And all that has to do with white Jesus.
Yeah.
Mercy.
Yeah.
Because white Jesus is not just an image. It's an ideology rooted in white supremacy.
I think that's one of the reasons you want to be so aggressive in not making just little cosmetic changes, but making drastic changes, because a lot of this is just missiological, man. It really has an impact on what we do in our communities. Seriously.
Yeah. And as the both of you were talking, I think what also came to my mind, I just totally agree with everything that you're saying, Dr. Burton. I feel like what I heard you say first, let me repeat what I heard first. Adventism's neo-colonialism that they call world evangelism is stamped when we continue to use images of white Jesus on our evangelistic materials. And it comes along with I don't want to say treatment, but it comes along with behaviors. We're going into these communities, not just giving them a certain kind of white Jesus, but we're giving them a particular culture. And we're telling them that they have to sacrifice their culture on the altar in order to come into salvation. Now, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on the impact of white Jesus and evangelism, because I personally feel like there is an impact on discipleship retention. And I think this in my brain, but I don't have, this is not my paid career. So I don't have like
what connection are you making? It's particularly in terms of retention.
I wonder if there are Black people who are, let's say, receiving certain things ideologically, theologically in conversation. And then when we hand them certain Bible studies, the thing is how if I say them out loud, I get canceled. If I give them certain again. We're trying to start a new leaf, 2026.
Amazing facts.
Maybe if I don't name them, I'll be able to keep my anonymity. But if we give them certain Bible studies, certain books, and it has this very Sabbath school lesson that's on the flyer for this conversation. If we give them these materials, do they feel disconnected from us and say, man, you know what? Like, I don't like this. I don't really want to be a part of this. And so now we're finding them leaving and going to churches that celebrate and have more images of Black people and Blackness.
Yeah. Except that it's unfortunate that a lot of the churches that are in our communities have been just as racialized as our church has been.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is all familiar territory to them. Having said that, the answer is obviously yes. That's a rhetorical question.
And then I'm looking at the movements that are now attracting young Black men, especially, right? So look at the Hebrew Israelites, and we saw the the Nation of Islam back in the day when it was more popular, etc. We're looking at all this. Then we're also looking at some of the liberation movements, right? We're looking at the Black Panthers. We're looking at us. We're looking
Yeah.
at all these things, and if we're thinking about attracting some of those folk who I believe have a heart for the gospel. I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
at a presentation in Boston last year, the American Academy of Religion, on Black theology and the Black church. And during the discussion, folk were asking, "Oh my goodness, sorry, the Black Panthers and the Black church,
Mhm.
Black Panthers and
Say,
Black,
wait a minute, say
whatever,
it again, Keith.
it was that the Black Panthers,
Say it
right?
again, Keith.
The Black Panthers and Black Theology. That was the
Gotcha.
title. Black Panthers and
Wow.
Black Theology. And it was based on a book. I forget the author of the book, but he was the main person there, right? Aubrey Hendricks was there too. He did a response, etc. Right?
Mhm.
So during the question and answer time, the issue came up. Well, where was the church during this time? And I thought about it, and I raised my hand, and they recognized me. I said the church was right there. They said, "What do you mean, church?" But the church was the Black Panthers. Okay, so we're
Yeah.
looking at the institution,
That's good.
and then but there's a back, and I think that if we are going to be relevant,
That's good.
then we need to take away those barriers.
Mm.
That when people, because I think we have an excellent message, we have an empowering message, we have an empowering message, but we need to take away those barriers that obstruct people's vision of Christ, their vision of God, because we just obstruct. And when we talk about art, it's not just pictorial depictions.
Yeah.
It's when it comes to musical
Yeah.
depictions.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Covered in his life, whiter than snow.
Yeah.
Lord Jesus, I want to be perfectly whole. Wash me now, be whiter than snow. And if you think about it, now there is a text in Isaiah that says, though your sins may be as scarlet, they'll be as white. It doesn't say, though your skin be as scarlet, it'll be white. And we turn it, and so
Yeah. Hermeneutics matters, Doc.
I would respond differently if they says my sins are like scarlet. You're washed of it. But no, you're basically saying
Yeah.
you want to be washed whiter than snow. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's accidental.
Yeah.
I don't think
that's
that's
so
accidental.
good.
And personally, I think that when most people sing it,
Yeah.
they're thinking about though your sins be as scarlet may be as white as snow, but that's not what the words say.
Yeah.
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 And so there's a subliminal message sometimes that elevates the whole night, and especially if you're using the multimedia stuff in the background and this white Jesus with his hands out like this, and you're looking
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I want to be like you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other thing that came to my mind, and we probably don't even have time for this, but
We got
I think
time.
that I think that there is a gendered aspect to this conversation
I knew
as
this.
well.
Hey, Keith, I knew this was coming, man. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Listen,
Go ahead.
on behalf of the Black women,
Go ahead.
I am seeing there have been several articles, particularly since 2018, talking about a quiet exit of Black women out of Black churches, specifically going towards the occult, joining witchcraft
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
things of this nature.
Yeah.
And I even read one article where a person interviewed a young African woman who was raised in the UK, and she was raised Seventh-day Adventist. And a lot of these young Black women, when they are asked why they are leaving Christian churches and joining the occult, literally it is attached to, I wasn't allowed to operate in leadership or in my spiritual gift. I was told that, my identity and purpose is to be subjected and second class, and the occult or this particular, West African religion is giving me a vision of Black womanhood that is akin to that of a goddess. And I am attracted to this idea of being a goddess rather than being subhuman, subpar. And so I think part of the conversation of the racialization of Christ as well is that I think it matters too, because there are Black women who are fundamentally not seeing themselves as represented in the church, as being heard in the church, as being part of the church. They are not part of the body of Christ in any substantive capacity. And so they are almost feeling pushed out of the Christian community and towards I mean, quite explicitly Satan. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think that's something that I think we've got to address as well, is like, hey, how do we stop Black women from not seeing themselves as being a part of the body of Christ, and being attracted to the lie and deception that is deification in the occult?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, you raised a good question. I'm not sure if it's maybe some of the work. I'm trying to think. It's not Oziak, but there are some theologians actually who argue for an androgynous Jesus. Okay,
Mm.
some feminist theologians.
Yeah.
I personally ain't going there, but,
I know,
but
Elder.
I know
Yeah.
there are some who argue for that. But
Yeah.
I do think that as we look at this, it is relevant because oftentimes when we just look at Christ as the object to be worshipped, we forget what the gospel is all about. The gospel is
Yeah.
laid out in Luke chapter 4, Matthew chapter 25. It's about liberation, right? And so I
Mhm.
think recovering the Black Christ, recovering the Christ who suffered, recovering the Christ who led that revolution is something that Angela Davis can hold on to, something that Assata Shakur can hold on to,
Right.
something that speaks to all hearts. But I do think that when you have this whole fixation on this icon
Yeah.
where the messenger and the message itself becomes the image and the message is somewhat watered down,
Hmm.
then it's very easy for people to forget why Jesus came.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Hey, listen, there's more to come.